Welcome, everybody, to the very first episode of Generation Fucked, or Generation F for those with soft
Watch
ears.
your language, boy.
Jeez.
Thought I raised you better than that.
Well, everybody, welcome to the show. It's our very first episode. This is me and my father. We're going to be talking about lots of different subjects, lots of different opinions. Dad, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
My name's Charlie. Basically, grew up. I don't know what generation we called. We're not baby boomers. But we're the ones who struggled through the '80s.
Right, just after. It's like, what is that? Gen. They have some letter for it, I'm sure.
I'm sure I don't know. I think we're pre-Generation X because we weren't jumping off of 30-foot half pipes and shit like that yet.
That is true. I mean, yeah, because I often get caught up kind of in a weird 5-year position where I was born. I was born in 1998. So, like, a lot of people that was born before me are going to say you're not a 90s baby because you lived for 2 years into the 90s. But yet I would still consider myself not as relating so much as far as my sister was born 3 years later in 2001. She had different things growing up as well, even from that just small difference because, technology had been developing so quickly, and that's really where it started kicking up.
Oh, yeah. Well, the time that you're growing up in, you think is everything is going so fast, but when you look back on it, you realize how much faster it actually went.
I looked it up right here, actually. Generation X is considered, according to Wikipedia, the period between 1961 and 1981. So that would take
1961 and 1981.
I've heard a lot of, when I tend to look these up, they do a lot of them happen to have like different age range, different ranges, but it usually seems to be within a 5-year, average on both sides if you give or take. But yeah, I think you fit just barely into the beginning of Gen X.
Wow.
Just I guess people would say like I'm not a millennial because millennials technically were people only count up to 1995.
Yeah.
But people wouldn't I wouldn't consider a Gen, whatever the newest one was a Gen Z that we're on now, I think.
I don't know.
Like Ben or Haley, even Ben and Haley, that's 7 years again, like in between that. But just goes to show that things are changing rapidly, more and more rapidly every decade that passes, even more so. I mean, obviously we all know this, but it's only going to happen faster and faster and faster the further we go down the line.
Oh yeah. Like I was saying, child of the '80s, and just grew up in the suburbs of Southern California. Did all the normal things, played Little League and soccer and got all of that, and got out of high school and said, had enough school, so I'm going to learn a trade, and got into the printing business. And just spent my 20s, when I turned 21, 30 years before you, all it was about having a good time. And then years later, down the road, as I got older, figured out, guess it's time to settle down. And just 2 weeks before I turned 30, your mom gave birth to you.
1998. It was the end of an era. All right, yeah. So I was born in 1998. A lot of things were changing at that time. Technology was booming huge. Cell phones would later, within a very early part of my childhood, become a very regular part of everybody's thing. The internet, the growth of websites, everything, that's, still evolving today to this day, as we see with many forums that have become much more popular, much more mainstream. But, at the time when I was born, obviously I'm not recalling my years before the age of 5 as any real life experience. But, I was from what the things I grew up around and and the general experience I had in my environment, in the household that I was in, I was exposed to a lot of that technological growth as a child. I think that totally.
I think you just got lucky.
Oh yeah, definitely. I definitely did get lucky. But anyways, like. I got to basically mess around with all kinds of stuff, as VHS. I was started on VHS players. We had VHS all the time. We had, tapes were still a thing. People still had to, your 2005 Ford Ranger still had a cassette player in it. So,
yeah.
People still had them. People still played them. And obviously I was aware of them to an extent. I still preferred CDs, I got to say, at the time because they were just cooler.
Seriously, new.
They were.
New and
It's
shiny.
fancy technology. You get to plug your headphones right into it and just carry it around with you. I remember having One that little CD, it was a one CD player that you could carry. Just put one CD inside, flip it open like a little like a waffle iron, and close it back over, and listen to that one CD all day. I listened the hell out of that.
Well, back when I was your age, it was a cassette player that would hold one cassette, and you called your Walkman.
Exactly. I see those everywhere, and I always went. I was like, man, yeah, it's pretty similar. It's like technology evolves, but they obviously had an original model at some point, and they're just improving upon the best model.
Well, I'm sure somewhere along the line there was a record player you could carry with you that while you walked around.
Yeah, definitely. I know. Right? Hey, I used to have a little mini boom box that I would carry around a lot for a little while when I didn't have my what's it called, because it would bump louder. It would have louder music, and I can play all my metal songs as a freaking little 7-year-old, 8-year-old.
Boom boxes have been one of those things it's had different variations, but it spans generations. Like you gotta have your music with you when you go out.
Exactly, you take it out. Yeah,
it's music on the go.
Right, whether it be some 20-pound chunk of metal over your shoulder, or a pound and a half Beats pill. It's always going to evolve. We're always going to stick to the things we like and just improve upon them, and that's the cool thing that we get to see, and that they're becoming so regularly available.
That's right. And what we're trying to do with this podcast is just take a look at things, topics, trends, just things of life, and look at them from the perspective of a couple different generations. It's not a who's better or who's worse, but it's taking different views of the same thing and seeing them from different sides. Webster defines a generation as a group of individuals born and living contemporaneously. But as we were kind of saying, it's hard to define where one generation starts and one ends. So
exactly. I think it really
could say every 5 years. Could you say every 10 years? It's hard to say.
Right.
But I mean, there's a definite difference between my generation and the baby boomers.
No, exactly. Right. There is a total difference.
That the baby boomers were totally different from the what you might call the World War II generation. There are just these levels in, I guess, our evolution or our existence where we just go through stages, and those stages are defined, I guess.
Yeah, I would definitely say it's just a culmination of everything that, has been apparent that we're exposed to over generations, things like news, things like politics, like you were saying, things like music. That's something that we all experience, but we all experience very differently over the course of just 5 to 10 years.
Right.
Going as far change,
And it's, I don't think that you grew up that much differently than I did, as far as, middle class or whatever you want to class
right.
You want to,
like you were saying earlier, I played baseball as a kid too. I played sports when I grew up. I played outside. I wasn't always on a video game console, although I did play them frequently.
Right. But each one of us is a product of our environment, but the environment, it shows how the environment changed while we lived in it.
No, exactly, because that whole taking in that nature, nurture, and your environment versus what you're born with, kind of thing, and the people that you're around all the time, those are where you develop, what kind of music you like, your different, what influences you decide to take, who you decide to listen to, what you think is important to you, and what really shapes you as an individual. That just so happens to fall into category with thousands of other people that go around, and you find these different groups amongst your individualness, that you seem to fall into, and those groups end up becoming popular terms, as far as just categories of people are concerned, and they change as the decades pass by over and over again as we have different representations of music culture as far as, punks, metal hits, all that kind of stuff, all of that has evolved. There are still, yes, punks and metal hits, but they're more or less the same, but also came up in a different realm.
And it's, I think music plays such a big part in defining a generation, because that's what music is constantly evolving and changing. It's always youth that comes up and creates something new, even when they're building on something old. But they're the new voice. They're a new voice of the generation. And when you take multiple bands or sounds like that and put them together, it seems like it's a movement. And I think that's partly what defines different generations more than anything else. More in the last, I would say, 50 years than, you know, of all time.
Right, of course. Yeah, we're definitely some change in environment and growing up from, as we would say, maybe the Roman child or something.
So then it makes you wonder what defined generations before that.
Exactly.
What guided,
Yeah.
what
What was punk rock in 30 A.D.?
yeah, exactly. That was two long-haired kids banging rocks together.
Yeah. Hey, turn down that racket. We're singing religious chants over here. Come on, guys.
You're drowning out our flute.
We're not going to get rain for the next 3 years if we don't finish this. Get up. Come on. Put down the rocks.
So I took a look at some of the things that had happened back in 1989 when I turned 21.
1989. And I always admired the 80s. I always liked 80s culture. I wonder why. But anyways, whether it came from music from listening under my mom or listening to my dad, obviously, 80s music was obviously a huge incorporation. I grew up listening to a lot of thrash metal, a lot of classic punk rock, a lot of stuff that spanned from, the 60s generally to the 90s and through on all the way whatever was pumping too. System of a Down is my favorite band. It always has been since I've been, I was about 6 years old when my dad showed it to me, and I love them ever since. But that just goes to show, it's a whole, the whole differences, the changes in music, culmination, and how it really identifies, becomes one of your identity in that year that you're raised in.
Definitely. But when you see some of the top bands back in 1989, you're going to wonder how music evolved at all.
Right.
But to give you an idea of what kind of year it was, in January on the 20th, yes, January 20th, Ronald Reagan was replaced as the President of the United States with George W. Bush.
Really?
No, George H.W. Bush.
Really? That's interesting because I was thinking about this podcast earlier today. I was thinking about what I was going to talk about, what I was going to ask about, and I was thinking, who was the president at that time?
So
I was like, is that Reagan?
Went from Reagan to a former air quotes CIA guy who just became our president.
Wow, interesting. And the funny thing is that doesn't sound super radical to me, considering all the crap that goes on anyways.
No, compared to today, that was all pretty tame. At least they kept everything under wraps. They did a lot better job of hiding.
It's like nowadays, it's like you'll get an hour of spotlight for something like that spread across all the news stations at once, and then by 2 days later, we'll be talking about whatever the next meme is. So,
but that's how the year started out. Some of the other things that happened. Nintendo began selling the Game Boy.
Really? The original Game Boy.
The original
1989.
Game Boy.
Interesting. Yeah. I had a Game Boy Advance SP when I was a kid, and that was one of my that was to this day the only handheld gaming device that I ever really bought or played.
That's when I was 21. So it was like, Game Boy? I ain't got time for a Game Boy. Can't play Game Boy at the bar.
Right, because it didn't even have the lit up screens yet either, too. Wow, that's crazy.
Let's see some of the other things. First release of Microsoft Office.
Wow, Microsoft Office 1 came
Microsoft Office. Office happenings such as Microsoft Word, Excel, dependent on the version you purchased, would depend on which applications were included.
Wow, that's the year those all started. That's crazy because that's really just it's become such an integral part of just owning a computer in general. It's like you don't second guess downloading Office. It's already usually most of the time it's already built into the console. It's become such a and for me during my school years, ever since elementary school, we were learning how to use Excel, learning how to use Word, learning how to use all this stuff. I had no idea that that's the year they all came out.
Yeah, and how often does it get used now? Well, I mean we use it a lot at work, but. Now it's all becoming Google Cloud.
Right, Google Classroom, and even at that point, even at that point to the Google, I'm glad that I was at least on the last bit, of some of the hands-on educational stuff before it quite got, overly digital. And I was lucky enough to have teachers that liked to teach classically versus with all the new technology and all that stuff, and it just made for a more intimate classroom. But as far as like Ben these days, like he's doing that Google Classroom stuff, whereas all it's totally everything's digital, everything's straight to his thing, and in a matter of time, he's just gonna have an app that's gonna plug right into a school and just gonna have everything running through there.
Yeah, it's totally different. And see, I like this one. Scientists pronounced 1989 as the warmest on record, possibly a sign of the greenhouse effect.
Wow, talk about some relevancy there. Jeez, possibly. Highlight
They were,
possibly.
scientists still weren't sure back then about this whole greenhouse thing. It was, it was scientists knew what was going on,
Right.
but nobody else.
Yeah.
No, it's fine. It's
You
fine.
know-
It snows in the winter and it's sunny in the summer. Yeah,
Exactly. It's like unless you went out of your way to go take a geology class, like and a college level geology class to let you know, and that's only if you got lucky enough that was available, or if even it existed at that point for that specific type of thing. Because we'll save climate change for another episode that we talk about. But taking one class that I did in college taught me everything I needed to know. Statistically, graphically, scientific, whatever I needed to know about climate change, and that's kind of insane that it was just possibly.
Yeah.
Well, maybe, just maybe.
But you can see, is that when people started noticing that? Oh, it does seem to be getting warmer every year.
Right.
Yeah. And somebody, it's at that point that somebody says, hello, we noticed something.
Yeah. Hey.
Oh, we'll look into it.
Well, we got a lot more water coming around up here, and those big ice cubes keep getting smaller.
It was just some of the. Let's see.
See, I wonder, is that around when did the Green Party become a thing?
I'm sure there were. I'd have to look. You'd have to
That'd be
look
crazy,
up the history of the Green Party.
I'll do just that.
But I'm sure it's somewhere was particularly in California,
Right.
that it's been around at some level, but just like now, well, the only reason you hear about them now is because
wow.
of social media.
2001, April 2001.
Wow.
Wow. So that was basically as long as Haley's been around. That's the Green Party.
But did it evolve from something else, I wonder?
Oh, more or less. I mean, people also searched for the Progressive Party in 1912, but but yeah, no, it seemed like, I mean, I'm sure it probably expanded out of several groups that got Congress's attention or got their city spokesmen some attention on something. Yeah. But yeah.
But it's just like the Tea Party. Eventually, it's going to evolve into something else, and eventually break apart. But right now, they're very comfortable being part of the Republican Party, so they're not going to change anything.
Right.
Let's see. One of the other things that happened in 1989 is when they tore down the Berlin Wall.
I was just thinking about that, 2 facts ago. I was like, wait a second. I was like, 1989. I was like, isn't something significant happened in Germany? I was like, but yeah, that's interesting because I've always wanted to go visit that, and go see the whole history behind that. I'm a World War II fanatic, so that whole aftermath and everything that happened and how much it affected the rest of the world, from that point on, even through the 80s.
But it might, when I was at that point, I was like, yeah, there's a wall in Berlin. Okay, yeah, it's left over from World War II. How does that affect me?
Right. I mean, at 20, you're like, okay, they tore down a wall. That's nice. You're like, cool.
Yeah. Okay.
Good for them.
You guys can walk back and forth now without getting shot.
Yeah, you're like, fantastic.
Welcome
this
to
is
the 20th century.
Right. This is a step forward.
But what got me is how they marketed breaking it down. They were selling pieces of the Berlin Wall.
Yeah, I hear stuff about that all the time. People go, and stuff sells for so much too.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's like,
really? It was like
you're like, man. I mean, I get it. I mean, crap. I can't speak, but I would totally be the type of person who would buy a historical, artifact or something like that if it was offered to me for a reasonable amount of money. But. There is a line to be drawn at some point. I would say, probably a little more important to the German people.
oh yeah. One thing Well, I know. I think they were just celebrating this not too long ago. It's also in April of 1989 was the protest in Tiananmen
Tiananmen Square.
Square.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's true. How did I? Like all this
And
stuff is
here
like
we
popping
are
up.
with Hong Kong.
Yeah.
30 years later.
So, yeah, exactly.
It's like, really?
It's like, some things do change a lot and other times not as much, It's surely like everything that like naturally will change with technology and all that, but when it comes to governments and power, it's a whole nother monster.
It's some of eventually we got to figure out a way to let people do what they want to do and give them the freedom to do it without going behind their backs and ripping them off or
Exactly. Like
destroying
there's no coercion,
Yeah.
no threats. Just a little bit of freedom, but freedom isn't free.
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy. Yeah, we just passed that up not too long ago, and man. Well, see, all this stuff is popping up now, like up in my head. And I'm just like, I'm thinking about just as we're talking, like, oh, I wonder if this happened in that year. I wonder if this happened. Oh, yeah, it did. Really should have done my research before this happened.
Well, it's then you look at some of the fashion, and that's definitely the things you don't want to remember.
Oh yeah, definitely. Oh, I'm sure. I mean the 80s. I mean even some parts. I'll say, like especially for like my generation of like people around my age. I'm 21 years old. I was like, so a lot of the people at my age are like grew up kind of like me. They were listening to a lot of alternative rock and like that. Well, we either had a heavy metal phase, an emo phase, or a scene phase, as we would call it. And everyone went through it at some point. I know I was definitely going through the heavy metal phase. I was that guy, that was like, yeah, man, I only listen to Slayer and System of a Down, and I only listen to hard stuff, dude.
It was the same way. We had to rebel, and I was the Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, Motorhead guy.
Right, and it would have been so badass for those to be the bands that were actually like relevant in that time too. It's like I'll tell like in high school, I'm all like tell freshman guys are like, "Woo, what's that patch for?" Oh, it's the Dead Kennedys. And they're like, "Who?" I'm like, "Oh," I'm like, "Man," I'm like, it makes me feel old. I'm the same age as these people. I'm like, "What am I?" I'm like, the music is just come on, music knowledge you should generally grow out of your decade.
Well, luckily, years earlier when I was in high school, you couldn't be a punk and a metal dude at the same time because the punks would kick your ass and the metal dudes would think, "What, dude? You're selling out, dude."
And that's hilarious because like I totally believe it and I know it because like I've had several other people, like, teachers of mine from schools that are your age that would tell me the same exact thing. Punks that I know that would say they'd beat up metalheads and metalheads that I know that would say they'd beat up punks. I was like, wow. And meanwhile, me starting up with my little band of Rugrats that we have going on here, we have a crust punk guy, some hardcore punk dude, and a metalhead.
Well, it was punks were punks back then, just to be punks.
Right.
And that was the only reason why they were punks is just so they could get away with doing shit.
Oh,
call it punk.
That's true.
But speaking of music, okay, here's the popular musicians of 1989: Duran Duran,
Of course.
Paul McCartney, Phil Collins,
My boy.
Prince, rest in peace.
Of course.
Madonna, Erasure.
I've heard of them, but I can't recall any of their songs.
The Bangles. I know you've
The
heard
Bangles,
of them
of course.
from your mom.
I love the Bangles, dude. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure too. It's great.
Let's see, who do we got? New Kids on the Block.
New Kids on the Block, man. I don't listen to them.
I was definitely anti New Kids on the Block.
I don't even think I can. A song can come. Well, I'm sure if you played a hit,
Isn't that the brothers? It's one of the brothers.
Oh, it's one of the. Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
The guy's from Boston.
Really? Yeah, I don't. I would not be.
Cher was big.
Cher.
REM, Depeche Mode.
REM and Depeche Mode, yeah.
Paula Abdul.
Yeah. That was the year she was hitting?
Yeah, there you go. See, look how big she is now.
Yeah. Is she still a judge on American?
I don't know.
I
Did
don't
she
know.
make the cut?
I'm honestly not sure.
Did Simon let her on that show?
I don't even know if Simon's on it anymore.
even when he's on it, he's not really there.
Exactly. He's just there to critique.
Garth Brooks.
Garth
and
Brooks.
Elvis Costello.
And Elvis
Those
Costello.
are the big ones on this list.
Interesting. Yeah, I believe it.
There's no Metallica on there. No
That's true.
Slayer.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, a lot of pop.
No punk, no metal, no rap. Definitely.
Which is funny because at this point, like, as far as like, from I have the whole privileged perspective of, nobody cares, about everything on my ears. Like, everybody's cool with each other. Everyone's cool, which is good. It's for the better. I was like, but it's hard to believe that it totally wasn't like that at all, and it took a long time for things to catch on.
Well, I was being born in 1968. That was the whole civil rights movement.
Yeah, that's true.
And that was when everything was supposed to change. But it was like, you look back and you realize things only changed a little bit.
Right. Certain things changed.
Certain things changed.
Other things,
but you can't change people.
Exactly. Yeah. And even proving to be generations on generations, it just depends on who you were born with, who raised you up, and what environment you're in.
Now, you being a film student, I'm sure you're interested in what the hot movies were.
Oh, yes. 1989.
1989, we had Batman.
Batman.
Val
Kilmer?
No, not Val Kilmer. That was Michael Keaton.
Michael Keaton Batman.
That was
yeah. Funny face Batman.
Tim Burton and
the Tim Burton Batman. Yeah, that one was pretty good. I've been talking about the Batman movie so much recently because Joker obviously just came out. I just went and saw that. It was a great movie. I was like, but started firing up, my Batman fandom. Wanted to go back and watch The Dark Knight and go back and watch these. But yeah, the Michael Keaton Batman, that was good. I definitely take that over the Val Kilmer Batman.
That was one of the first big superhero movies.
Right. Really?
That was kind of when that was the one that kind of got things rolling. I mean, there weren't any big Marvel movies before then, and they hadn't really done much with any of the other DC characters other than Superman.
Yeah.
And you had the Christopher Reeve Superman movies.
That's true.
But yeah, it was just at that point DC was the only one doing anything.
Yeah.
There were some,
low budget stuff
movies,
that was getting worked on. Yeah.
That was the first big. Well, no, the Superman movies had big budgets. The ones for the time with Christopher Reeve. But yeah, that was the first big.
That was a dark character. It was a new. It wasn't It wasn't just Superman.
Yeah, he was kind of dark, but it definitely wasn't the Batman of the '60s with the.
Right, we're not a comic book, Batman.
Exactly.
We're not very, classic comic. Yeah, no Adam West.
Yeah, exactly.
Rest in peace.
Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. That was the third one.
The Last Crusade. That one, I like that one. Yeah.
With Sean Connery.
Yeah.
The one your grandma likes so much.
Yeah.
Let's see. Lethal Weapon 2.
Lethal Weapon 2. Man, I remember I was like 12. We went to Blockbuster one time. We were living out in Moreno Valley. We went to Blockbuster when Blockbuster was still a thing. That's another. I love they have the 4 for $20 deal.
Exactly.
You can get 4 movies. I got a pack of Lethal Weapon 1 through 4 and watched them all in like 2 weeks. Fantastic.
Yep. And what happened to them?
Yeah, I know exactly. Like I'm sure they're lying around somewhere in a bookcase or a box.
Let's see. We also had Ghostbusters 2. Not quite as good as the first one, but that's everybody was riding those sequels because we also had Back to the Future Part 2.
Oh.
So
Back to the sequels.
Yes, it was definitely a year of sequels.
Which is funny. I mean, kind of how the film industry is going right now. We're seeing a lot of reboots and sequels, especially in the last 5 to 10 years, have been going on like just over and over and over again. But
it's like if you can't make a sequel, we'll just remake the first one.
Exactly, and it's like, man,
it's okay. It's been 5 years.
Yeah, it's exactly like that time limit for making a reboot has become so short. I mean, like Suicide Squad. I heard they're getting a reboot that's completely not related to the other. They're saying let's just rewrite it. Let's do it again.
Nobody liked the first one.
This one. We'll write the script opposite of the first.
The problem is you'll never please comic book fans.
That's the thing. Yeah, you're either paying too much homage or you're not paying enough homage.
If you go too close to the comics, you're not going to get people
Exactly.
out to come see it.
Yeah, people are gonna say it's boring. Yeah, but you don't do it enough, people are gonna be like, "Oh, well, this is nothing like the character I love."
Let's see some of the other ones. The Little Mermaid.
Oh, wow! The Little Mermaid came out in 1989.
Yeah.
Really? Wow. We have I saw that on VHS when I was a kid. We got a whole VHS collection of all the Disney movies.
Of course. Dead Poet Society. Matt Damon making his debut.
Matt Damon.
And Robin Williams, of course.
Yeah,
Rest in
of course.
peace.
Of course. I know. It's terrible, man.
It's-
It's terrible. A lot of these people are like that were like, banging with and in whatever position they're in, whatever industry they're in. Like, it's just been unfortunate. It's all like a lot of them have just been passing lately, especially. I mean, and every year it doesn't. It seems like more and more.
Yeah. Well, it's how it. That's what happens.
Yeah, exactly. As I said,
That's
it's the end of an
evolution.
era.
It is. It's you associate certain things to, particularly music or movies, with certain people, and when they pass, it's like part of that.
A little piece of that.
A little piece
decade.
of that gets lost.
Exactly. Yeah.
We had Driving Miss Daisy.
Driving Miss Daisy.
That
I know the movie. I have not seen it. I haven't actually watched it.
I never saw it either, but it was just it was one of those like I can't speak for the position of a black person, but it was one of those movies that it brought up feelings with people that they didn't like because it addressed things and the way people were. But it also made people look at that and look at it from a different direction. Once again, like we were talking about how even though during the 60s the civil rights movement, passed.
Right, was supposed to be said and done.
Said and done. We were supposed to evolve, but even at that time, there were still a lot of feelings on different sides.
Right. You had ignorant people, and you had when you gather ignorant people together, and they do stupid things and things that aren't morally right. It's like
that's the thing is it's ignorance. And at some point you hope that we'll get past that, but in the meantime, it's just you have to deal with it. Because
unfortunately, it's a
unfortunately,
part of
yeah,
it still has very much, of course, even watching just the news today, it's like it is not, things have not necessarily maybe slowed down. Some people would argue it hasn't. They make improvements. We could try to get body cameras on people and try to, make sure that people aren't getting discriminated against, but then people get away with things, and then it just passes on, and sometimes things get forgotten, and it gets really fucked up sometimes.
When Obama was elected, you thought, hey, we've taken a step up. But 8 years later, it was like, wow, really? Would you just take 2 steps back?
Yeah, exactly. We're like, well, where are we going? Yeah, exactly. It's like, now it seems like we're just going to erase half of the crap that we supposedly learned from this experience.
Exactly. So a lot of changes over the last 30 years, and hopefully we can take a look at things and find some similarities and discuss the changes and take a look at those changes and see if maybe they were for the better or for the worse. Maybe
exactly.
We need to call that out too.
Yeah, but lots of things to talk about, lots of things to bring up. Of course, if anybody's listening out there, we are wholeheartedly open to suggestions. If you guys have anything that you think would be a great generational topic or just an interesting topic in general, whether it be current events on any subject, go ahead and send it in, leave a comment, do whatever you can do for that. We will definitely check it out and most likely bring it up in an episode because we're going to need content.
Especially, and if there's something that you and your son or your daughter or you and an older person and a young person just don't see eye to eye on something, let us know. We can take a look at it and see where we stand on it. And we can't say we can help one side win or lose, but maybe we can help both sides look at things a little differently.
And it looks like that's going to be all for episode 1. Tune in again next time. In a couple of weeks, we'll have episode 2. We're going to be talking about music culture and a couple of different changes that we've had from, obviously my father's generation and my generation, album culture, single culture, how everything has changed, especially with the introduction of streaming services and things like Spotify, Pandora, and stuff like that. Anyways, tune in next time. Stick around. Again, leave a like, follow us, do whatever you got to do. If you don't like us, sorry we couldn't entertain you.
Better luck next time. Thanks again for listening, and join us again.